We're going to begin with the horrendous crash earlier today, early in the going at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. It's ugly. If you don't want to watch, I don't blame you. That's your choice. I don't like it either, but we cannot pretend that it did not happen. The two things that are most striking about this crash as we watch it in real time are the speed and the violence. This was a record field for the IRL. 34 cars, more than running the Indy 500. The speed's north of 220 miles an hour. So when it went wrong, it went very wrong in a very big hurry. There were 15 cars involved, 4 of them airborne to some degree or another. That's when the catch fence gets involved, and that is almost always serious trouble. The violence that unfolded here, difficult for those outside racing, and in fact for some of us inside the sport to fully comprehend. The fire is largely inconsequential. That is not what did the damage. Tangentially, perhaps, this crash ended the title hopes of Will Power and did so in pretty spectacular action. You're on board with Will now as his car gets launched high into the air. Fortunately, the launch point was all the way down on the inside white line, and so the car came to earth before it got to the catch fence. But that gives you a pretty good idea of what the crash today was all about. This still image catches, I think, the impact and the carnage. So in retrospect, hindsight always 20/20, the driver's comments after the crash seemed pretty easy to grasp. They pointed out that the Vegas layout encourages 225-mile-an-hour racing, but there's no way to get out of the middle of this big wad of cars. It's similar to a NASCAR plate race of a couple of years back, but without the fenders. So if somebody makes a little mistake, it becomes a huge crash, and there's no way to stay out of it. And the replays really bear that out, I think, if you look closely at how this unfolded. The trouble starts up here, a third of the way back into the pack. It's a small misjudgment, but it turns one car sideways, and once there's one car sideways in a field this big, traveling at that speed, there is simply nowhere for those immediately behind to go. But it's worse than that. Even those with a little room to react can't overcome the speed and the trajectory, the rules of physics for that matter. This is really a separate crash from the first one, and this is the one that got all the cars airborne. This is the one that caught up Dan Wheldon, who was already in the midst of an impressive charge from the back of the field. He'd passed an awful lot of cars in his effort to win a $5 million bonus as a result today. Now, the good news is that with 15 cars involved, only 4 drivers were hurt. J.R. Hildebrand, Pippa Mann, and Will Power all walked away. They were later taken to the hospital on a non-emergency basis for treatment. Sadly, Wheldon, one of IndyCar racing's most interesting characters, died of the injuries that he suffered in that crash, and tonight we remember him fondly. Early in his open-wheel career, Wheldon was a rival of his fellow Brit Jenson Button. Dan moved to the U.S. in '99, climbed through the ladder series and into the IRL, where he replaced Michael Andretti. As a driver, he was the '03 Rookie of the Year and won his first race in '04, driving for Andretti Green. Big moment, of course, the win in the '05 Indy 500, one of 6 victories that year, breaking Sam Hornish's single-season record and winning in the championship. Then it was on to Chip Ganassi racing in '06 and opening the year with the 24 Hours of Daytona win. At year's end, Dan was tied with Hornish in championship points, but lost the second crown because he had more. His opponent had more wins. Won at Iowa. His next to last IndyCar win was replaced at season's end by Dario Franchitti. And then last May, J.R. Hildebrand hit the wall on the final lap of the Indy 500 in a one-off drive for his new owner, Brian Herta. Dan Wheldon wins the big race for the second time in his career. I saw Dan as the kind of guy Americans could embrace, even though he wasn't American. He had that outgoing personality, that little bit of outrageousness in his demeanor, whether it was the number of shoes that he owned. The big thing, of course, the 2 Indy 500 wins, which make you an American hero no matter where you're from. Dan was a fun guy, managed to maintain his personality in a racing world that seems to try very hard to boil that out of a driver. With that, Robin Miller is going to join us live now from Las Las Vegas. Robin, you've covered this kind of racing for a very long time, back to the days when death was the rule and not the exception. Your thoughts first on Wheldon. I know you two tangled a time or two as recently as this week, but you also had some good times together.
I said earlier, Dave, he was one of those guys that the media gravitated towards because he was pretty quotable, but the fans really liked him because he went out of his way to make time for him. And I think that, you know, when he wasn't running full time, I got emails from people saying, God, I wish Wheldon would be back. He used to come by and have a cookout, and he'd stop and talk to us, and he was always a great guy. And we gave him a lot of, you know, I told him once, I said, Wheldon, you had the best smile with and without your new teeth. Because remember, he got those new teeth, and we were always giving him a hard time about being a model when he got done racing. But I think he was a guy that I just remember him coming over here and coming up through the ladder and winning races, and just he had no money behind him. He just had talent behind him. And I think that, you know, he was an American success story. Gene Simmons said on Wind Tunnel one night, you know, you ought to promote those Americans like Dan Wheldon. Remember that, David?
I do remember it well, yeah.
I think the thing that Wheldon brought to the table was he was a fiercely intense driver, especially on ovals. And he kind of got mad at me a year ago because I said he was an endangered species, finally having a full-time ride, because he was so good on ovals but not nearly as good on road courses, which is what he grew up on, winning races. So we kind of had a little cooling off period, but then we got back together this year, and it was fun. And when I wrote the story Friday that he was going to Michael Andretti's next year to take Danica's GoDaddy ride, he goes, brother, what are you doing that to me for? He says, couldn't you wait until Monday to write that story? He says, all these people are coming up to me. Now I gotta lie to all these people. So I just think he was one of those guys that we probably, he moved to St. Petersburg and he became kind of an American hero, and he was always one of those guys that people liked to cheer for.
Let's talk about the fact that racing has become dramatically safer, but as we are reminded today, it is still a very dangerous business. And the inevitable question out of this is going to be, is the kind of racing we saw today too dangerous? And if so, what's to be done about it?
Way too dangerous. I've been writing stories since the late 90s that this kind of insanity, this wide open mile-and-a-half pack racing, I mean, they got lucky. Kenny Brack's crash was on the backstretch at Texas, and all that stuff went into the grandstand, but there was nobody there. Ryan Briscoe was in turn 3 at Chicago and didn't hit anybody, and they both were able to survive. But when you're on top of each other and these cars are so stuck and they're going 220 miles an hour and you can't get out of the throttle because somebody's going to run over the top of you, it is not racing. It's like a big game of chicken. And Adrian Fernandez is here this weekend, and he was smart enough to quit in 2004 because he said, that ain't racing. I'm not getting involved in that anymore. He was in the IRL a couple years. He said he'd never seen the drivers as anxious, as in nervous as they were before the start of this race. And he said, I'm not talking about one or two. He says, I'm talking about every guy I talk to. So while racing, yes, it is inherently dangerous. When I grew up in the 60s, it seemed like it happened every other week in USAC. But the most important thing to remember is these tracks were built for NASCAR stock cars who are going 50 or 60 miles an hour slower. And when you got pack racing, as you said in your opening, and you rub wheels with somebody and you get somebody out of shape and there's 25 cars bearing down on you, there's no driver reaction, there's no way to survive it.
So is there a fix that enables Indy cars to continue to race on those kinds of tracks? Because the way I do the math, if you take away those kinds of tracks, oval racing as we know it, IndyCar oval racing as we know it, becomes a one-race deal. It's the Indy 500, and that's it.
Exactly. We've lost Milwaukee, Phoenix, maybe Loudon, the 3 tracks that are real oval tracks where the drivers have to drive. If you're going to stay on these mile-and-a-half bowls built for NASCAR, you got one option. You go back to the Hanford device like they used to have in kart in the late 90s. And it made the cars pass each other. It allowed cars to slingshot each other and pass. You didn't run next to each other in a big pack. Guys were passing each other. There's 165 passes at Michigan once. So they've shown you can run at Michigan and Fontana and big tracks like this and put on a show and still make it relatively safe. But if you can't do that, and you can't, I was talking to Steve Horn tonight. He goes, this is a fixable problem, but it has to be fixed immediately. You can't race next year, and you can't do this again until the problem is fixed. Either you fix the problem or you quit running on places like this and you become a road course, street course circuit, highlighted by the Indy 500.
You know, we can put so much pressure on ourselves to win races and championships, and it's what we love to do. And it's what we live for. And then in days like today, it doesn't really matter. You know, we lost a good friend, I think, everybody in the IndyCar series.
This is a dangerous sport. I know we're exposed to that every day in a normal life as well, but you know, you don't think about it. And today we have to think about it. I lost one of my best friends, one of my greatest teammates, and I don't know what to say.
Two of the late Dan Wheldon's teammates, and of course, Dario Franchitti was crowned champion today at the end of a very long and sad day. Tony Kanaan on the week in which he completed the Ironman Marathon, facing the tragedy of the loss of a good friend. Robin Miller is with us live from the Speedway where that tragedy occurred this afternoon. Robin, a lot of things, a lot of aspects of this that will be discussed, you know, as we all absorb the impact of what happened and then think about the surrounding circumstances. I'm curious your reaction to the decision to not restart the race. Was that largely a driver decision, do you think? How do you think that all went down, and what do you think of the decision itself?
Well, I think I was talking to a couple guys that are my age, early 60s, who've been around as long as I have, and in the old days, when a driver lost his life, if they did red flag the race, like Eddie Sachs and Dave McDonald, they restarted, they finished the race, and then they went to Conkles and mourned the guy. And that has always been, you know, when Greg Moore was killed at Fontana, nobody, you know, it was a one-car crash, so they kept going. They didn't tell anybody until the race was over. That was different. I remember doing something on ESPN saying, they said, why didn't they stop the race? Like, they're adamant. I said, because racers race and then they grieve. In this particular situation, knowing that the drivers were as uneasy about the speeds and the way that these cars were stuck to the track, and the fact that they had 15 cars and one of their soul brothers killed in a crash, I guarantee it was a driver decision.
Let's get some viewer input on that. I've got Bob on the line from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Bob, you want to weigh in on the question of whether or not they should have raced after the fatality today?
Oh, yeah, I think they should have went on. I mean, you know, Dan would have wanted that. He was a racer, and I think that that's what it's about. It's about the race. It's not about who died. It's about, you know, keeping going. I mean, like they said, when Foyt won, they cleaned up the racetrack and they went racing. They didn't stop. You should have raced in tribute to the man, not park and cry. We can cry now.
Let me ask you about Robin's point that perhaps this situation is different because of the driver's perception that they shouldn't have been racing there in the first place. Here's the proof. Now what sense does it make for us to go back out there and do more of this? It's just nuts, and we got no business. How do you feel about that?
No. These cars are designed with a lot of downforce. They can race anywhere. The track, it's not the track. Like Danica said, if you're going too fast, back off a little. You know, if you can't hold it, then don't go through the corner that fast. You know, I mean, you're a race car driver. You race to the conditions. You race to the track. Like Dale Earnhardt said, tie some gasoline rags around your ankles and don't let the piss ants crawl up them. You got to go. You can't just drive the car and decide, well, this track's not safe. I'm in Milwaukee.
We get it, Bob. I'm about out of time. Robin, a quick reaction to the notion that if the 10th place guy in the middle of that pack gets scared and lifts off, what happens?
Exactly. He doesn't know what he's talking about. You have to run wide open. You back off, you get run over, so that can't happen. Just remember this. Remember Dan Wheldon. Remember, as a little skinny kid from England racing Formula Fords that came over here, made it on his own, didn't have a sugar daddy, and went all the way to the top, won the Indy 500 twice, enjoyed the hell out of his life, and it's a shame that we lost him, and I grieve for Susie and his two little boys, and I just hope everybody remembers nobody held a gun to his head to do it. He wanted to do it. He's a racer. That's how we should remember this guy. And it was just a sad day in motorsports.
I'm not sure I'll have much to add to that, Robin. Very well put. We need a commercial break. We'll come back to say goodbye. Thank you, Robin Miller. Congratulations to Dario Franchitti on the championship earned today. And sorry we didn't have more time to discuss it.